All right, so today we're diving deep into English pronunciation. We've got some really cool material to work with. It's a dialogue between two friends, Oman and Sophia, and looks like they're trying to really level up their fluency.
Yeah.
Expert speaker, what were your first impressions?
I thought it was really interesting how they jumped right into silent letters. You know, those tricky letters that can really throw you off.
Yeah.
Aman brought up the silent B, like in words like comb or thumb. That's a classic one that a lot of learners struggle with.
Yeah, it really makes you think, why are those letters even there if we don't say them? It's so confusing.
Right. Well, Sophia actually had a really good point about that. She was saying that silent letters are often leftovers, I guess you could say, from how the language used to be spoken, like way back in the day, or kind of like linguistic fossils.
I like that. Linguistic fossils.
Yeah. Like, think about the great vowel shift, you know, that big change in pronunciation that happened between the 14th and 18th centuries.
Right.
The way we pronounce vowels changed dramatically, but the way we write them didn't really catch up.
So that's why we end up with all these silent letters.
Exactly. They're like little hints about how words used to be pronounced.
That's so cool. So it's like these silent letters are like little whiskers of history right there in our words.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
But okay, so how do we actually like decode these silent letter mysteries? How do we avoid those pronunciation pitfalls? Because, you know, you don't want to sound like you're from a different century.
Right. Well, Sophia had a really practical suggestion for that. She said it's helpful to focus on word families. So, for example, once you learn that the K is silent in night, you can kind of apply that rule to other words like knee and knife.
That's smart.
It's all about pattern recognition.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've tackled those silent letter saboteurs. What about those vowels? Aman and Sophia were talking about those two. Those could be tricky, right?
Oh, yeah. Vowels can be really tricky because they can sound so different depending on the word.
It's like they have a mind of their own.
And one of the big things they talked about was the difference between short and long vowels.
Right.
It's amazing how just like a tiny change in how you say a vowel can completely change the meaning of a word.
Oh, tell me about it. Ship versus sheep, or hat versus heart. I used to get those mixed up all the time.
Exactly. Those are classic examples. And Sophie made a really good point about paying attention to your mouth position when you're pronouncing vowels.
Oh, interesting.
It's like you have to understand how to move your mouth to make the right sound.
Oh, I see, like the physical mechanics of it.
Exactly.
Wow.
So for short vowels, your mouth is usually more relaxed and open, while long vowels need a bit more tension in a more closed position.
So it's like a little dance with your tongue and lips?
Exactly. It's like a subtle dance.
Yeah.
And Aman actually had a great tip for practicing this. He suggested working with minimal pairs.
Minimal pairs.
Yeah. So that's when you take words that differ by just one sound, like ship and sheep, and you really exaggerate the difference when you pronounce them. So you can really hear the contrast.
Exactly. It's a good way to train your ear and your mouth to really get those subtle differences.
That's clever. I can see how that would be helpful. Okay, so we've covered silent letters and those tricky vowels. Now, what about that ed ending? Aman and Sophia mentioned that too, right? It seems like there are so many ways to pronounce those two little letters.
Oh, definitely. That ed ending can be a real headache for learners. But Sophia did a really good job of explaining the three main ways it's pronounced.
Oh, good. Break it down for us.
So basically, it all comes down to the sound that comes right before the ed. If it's a voiceless sound, like in walked or stopped, the ed sounds like a T.
Got it.
But if it's a voice sound, like in called or played, then the ed sounds like a D.
Makes sense.
And then there's that third variation. When the base verb ends in a T or a D sound, like want or need, then the ed is pronounced as ed, like wanted and needed.
Right. It's like a whole different sound altogether. Exactly. And Sophia really emphasized that being aware of these rules and practicing them can make a huge difference.
It's amazing how these little details can have such a big impact on your pronunciation.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so we've covered silent letters, those tricky vowels, and the id ending. But Aman and Sophia didn't stop there, did they? They also went on to talk about different English accents, right?
They did, and it was fascinating to hear their perspective on that. They specifically compared American and British pronunciation, which I think can be really confusing for English learners.
It's like you have two sets of pronunciation rules to learn.
Exactly. And they pointed out some key differences. Like, for example, Aman talked about the R sound. Americans tend to pronounce it more strongly even at the end of a word, like in car. But in British English, the R is often silent unless it's followed by a vowel.
It's a big one, yeah.
It is. And then there's the T sound. That can sound very different depending on the accent. I've noticed that Americans often pronounce the T in words like water or better in a way that sounds almost like a D to British ears.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. It's funny how you don't really realize those differences until someone points them out.
Absolutely. It's like you've been hearing it your whole life, but you never really stop to think about it.
It's like those subtle things that you just pick up naturally without even realizing it. And they were talking about the A sound too, weren't they?
They were, and that's another interesting one.
Like the difference between how Americans and Brits say the word fast.
Exactly. In American English, it's a short A sound, but in British English, it's a longer, more open A sound.
It's amazing how these little variations can create such distinct accents.
It really is, and it's what makes the English language so rich and diverse.
Yeah, it is amazing. All these little differences. But it makes you think, with all these variations, how do you even know where to start as a learner?
Right. It can feel a bit overwhelming, like you've got all these tools, but you don't know which one to use. And that's where I think Aman and Sophia's conversation gets really helpful. Like, Sophia really emphasizes that the key is to just pick one accent and stick with it, especially when you're first starting out.
So, like, just choose your pronunciation path and stay on track.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you're trying to do a little bit of everything, you're more likely to get those sounds mixed up.
Makes sense. But how do you even choose, like American or British?
Well, Sophia had a good point about that too. She said to think about like your goals, like who are you going to be interacting with the most? So if you're planning to, live in the US or work with American colleagues, then focusing on American pronunciation makes the most sense. But if you're more interested in British culture or literature, then maybe British English is the way to go.
So it's all about finding what works for you.
Exactly. What feels right and what aligns with like your goals for learning English.
I like that. Okay, so we've chosen our accent adventure. We're navigating those silent letters and vowels. We're mastering those tricky aid endings. What else did Aman and Sophia talk about? What other pronunciation gems did they uncover?
Well, this is where Sophia introduced a technique that I think is so valuable, and that's recording yourself speaking.
Oh yeah, that could be scary.
It can be a little awkward at first, but it's seriously one of the best ways to improve.
I bet. Like holding a mirror up to your pronunciation.
Exactly. You can listen back and really hear, like, which sounds are you struggling with? Which words trip you up?
And you can also hear things like your intonation. Right.
Exactly. You can hear it all. It's like having your own personal pronunciation coach.
That's a great way to put it. But it's not just about individual sounds, is it? I remember Aman and Sophia talking about the music of English, like the rhythm and intonation.
Oh, absolutely. They talked about how English is a stress-timed language.
Stress-timed.
Yeah. So that means we put emphasis on certain syllables in a sentence, which creates like a rhythmic pattern. It's different from syllable-timed languages where every syllable gets equal emphasis.
So it's not just about saying the words correctly, but it's about saying them with the right rhythm.
Exactly. And that's where word stress comes in. Sophia pointed out that every multisyllable word in English has like a primary stress. There's one syllable that's pronounced with more emphasis than the others.
And mastering that is important for sounding natural.
It's crucial. It's like if you don't get the stress right, it can sound really unnatural, even if you're pronouncing all the sounds correctly.
So it's like learning the steps to a dance. You have to know where to put the emphasis.
I love that analogy. It's exactly like that.
But how do you actually develop that sense of rhythm and intonation? It seems pretty tricky.
Well, Sophia actually suggested a really interesting technique called shadowing. Have you heard of that?
I think so, but remind me.
So basically, it involves listening to a native speaker and trying to imitate them as closely as possible.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Not just the words, but like their intonation, their pauses, even their breathing.
Wow, that's intense.
It is. It's like you're really trying to embody the way they speak.
So it's like full immersion in the sounds of the language.
Yeah. And it's a fantastic way to develop a more intuitive sense of rhythm and intonation.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Did Aman and Sophia talk about any specific sounds that English learners tend to find challenging? Because I know there are a few that always trip me up.
They did. Sophia mentioned the th sound.
Ugh, yes. That one. Like in think or this.
That one can be a real tongue twister.
It's not a sound that exists in a lot of languages.
Right. And Sophia said that one of the best ways to practice it is to actually put your tongue between your teeth and gently blow air out.
It feels so weird.
It does feel strange at first, but it really helps you get the hang of it.
Okay, I'll have to try that. What about other sounds?
Well, they also talked about the R sound. That can be tough too, especially for people whose native languages don't have a similar sound. Sophia's advice for that one was to pay attention to where your tongue is. It should be curled back in your mouth, but not actually touching the roof.
It's all about finding that sweet spot, right?
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget about those vowels. Those can be super confusing too.
Oh, tell me about it. There are so many of them, and they seem to change depending on the word.
Yeah, that's where Sophia brought up the concept of vowel reduction.
Vowel reduction.
Yeah, so basically, when a vowel is in an unstressed syllable, it tends to get shorter and less distinct.
Ah, I see.
It's a natural part of English pronunciation, but it can be hard for learners to hear those reduced vowels.
Just like those unstressed vowels are playing hide and seek with our ears.
Exactly. They're like little ninjas.
Yeah.
And Sophia's advice was to really pay attention to how native speakers pronounce those unstressed syllables.
So just listen closely and try to pick up on those subtle differences.
Exactly. It's all about developing that ear for detail.
I'm definitely starting to realize how much detail there is to English pronunciation.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, isn't it?
It is. There's always something new to discover.
Yeah.
But Amma and Sophia didn't stop there, did they? They also talked about connected speech, right?
You're right. They started to notice that in real-life conversation, we don't pronounce words in isolation. Like, we connect them, which can create some interesting sound changes.
Oh yeah, it's like those words are having a little party in our mouths.
Exactly. They're all blending together and influencing each other.
So, like, what kind of sound changes are we talking about? Can you give me an example?
Sure. Like Sophia pointed out that when a word ends in a consonant sound and the next word begins with a vowel sound, we often link those sounds together. So, am becomes em, and pickup sounds more like pickup.
Wow, you're right. I never really noticed that before. It's like those sounds are reaching out to each other.
Exactly. And it creates a smoother, more natural flow of speech.
Did Sophia give any tips for mastering this whole connected speech thing?
Well, she said that the most important thing is just to listen carefully to native speakers.
Really pay attention to how those sounds are linking together.
Exactly. And then you can start to incorporate those patterns into your own speech.
It's like learning to play a musical instrument, isn't it? You have to learn how to connect those individual notes to create a beautiful melody.
I love that. That's a perfect analogy. It really is like music.
This has been so insightful. I feel like I'm starting to see English pronunciation in a whole new light.
Me too. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It really is. And what I love about Aman and Sophia's story is that they show us that anyone can improve their pronunciation.
Totally. With the right mindset, the right techniques, and a lot of practice.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that pronunciation isn't about being perfect. It's about expressing yourself clearly and confidently.
So true. And you know what? Maybe we should take a quick break here and come back for the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore some more of Aman and Sophia's insights and strategies for mastering pronunciation.
Sounds good to me. Okay, so we're back and ready to continue our pronunciation deep dive with Aman and Sophia.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey already.
It has. We've covered so much ground, from those silent letters, all the way to connected speech, and of course those tricky vowels and the rhythm and all that.
Right. And what I really like about their approach is that they make it clear that mastering pronunciation, it's not a one-time thing. It's like an ongoing process.
It's a lifelong journey.
Exactly.
You're always learning and improving.
Yeah, you're always refining your skills.
I like that. It takes the pressure off, right?
It does. It's not about being perfect right away. It's about embracing the process, having fun with it.
Totally. And speaking of those aha moments, I think what Aman and Sophia said about intonation was really interesting. They talked about how important it is for, like, conveying meaning.
Oh, absolutely. Intonation is key.
Like the way your voice rises and falls when you speak.
It's like the punctuation of spoken language, you know?
It's true. It tells you so much.
Yeah. Like, are you asking a question or making a statement? Are you being sarcastic or serious?
Exactly. But mastering intonation, it's not just about copying native speakers, is it?
Right. Sophia had a really good point about that. She said it's important to understand the patterns and the principles behind intonation.
I see.
Like, in English, we tend to use a rising intonation at the end of a question, right? And a falling intonation for a statement.
It's fascinating how our voice can do all that.
It really is. It's like learning a secret code.
It is. And then Aman, he had that tip about practicing intonation by reading out loud, like from a script or a book.
Yeah, that's a great one.
It helps you really pay attention to the punctuation and stuff.
Exactly. You start to see how your voice should be matching the meaning of what you're reading.
So it's like another way to train your ear to get that sense of how intonation works in English.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about Silent letters, vowels, connected speech, rhythm, intonation. What else did Aman and Sophia discover on their pronunciation quest?
Well, they also talked about the importance of just like having the right mindset. Yeah. Like being open to experimenting and not being afraid to make mistakes.
Oh, yeah, that's so important.
They said it's all about seeing mistakes as opportunities to learn.
That's a great way to look at it. It's like you're not failing, you're just learning.
Right. And I remember Sophia had this really great quote about pronunciation.
What was it?
She said, "The only way to improve your pronunciation is to speak, to actually use your voice, even if you're a little nervous at first."
I love that because it's true.
You have to be willing to put yourself out there, to practice, and to just like let your voice be heard.
Totally. And I think that's a great note to wrap up on because ultimately language is about connecting with others.
It's about sharing ideas, building relationships,
Yeah,
expressing yourself.
exactly. And pronunciation plays a huge part in all of that.
So I guess the takeaway here is embrace the journey,
Enjoy the process.
celebrate your progress, and most importantly, just keep speaking.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So to all our listeners out there, keep practicing, keep exploring, and keep having fun with English pronunciation. You got this.